I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Welcome to the Fidelis Leadership Podcast, a place of learning for those who aspire to leadership excellence. Here's our host, Mike Etor.
Randy Marmon is a results-oriented human capital executive. Randy's got extensive experience in leadership roles, including senior leadership roles, including C-level roles in large publicly traded companies. Randy's got a history of being a fixer of companies, quite frankly, that need to be fixed, and an optimizer of good companies who aren't in trouble. They just need to become better and optimize their operations and their revenue and profitability and all that. He's done all that in spades. Randy and I spent about 15 years together at Kforce. He was a valued colleague, confidant. I can't say enough good about his leadership skills, his business acumen. And I'm just thrilled that Randy has agreed to join us here today on the podcast. So with that, Randy, welcome to the Fidelis Leadership Podcast.
Thanks, Mike. It is great to be here. And it's been quite a while since we got a chance to work together one-on-one. And it's just great to be able to reconnect.
Yeah. Thank you. As I mentioned earlier, I'm just thrilled that you're here. And, full disclosure to everybody else, I mentioned it already. We did work together, and it was all my pleasure. You were one of the first people I met at Kforce. You were always good to me and my folks. So, a lot of respect there, and I can't say enough good about you. And so, hey, I'm looking forward to getting into it. But hey, the intro, Randy, did not do you justice. I know you. The audience doesn't, for the most part. What more do we need to know about Randy Marmon that I didn't cover in the intro?
It's again, thank you for inviting me today. I think the big piece, I started out as an archaeology major. That's something no one knows, probably not even you, in life. And I remember I was only a few classes away from graduating, and my father thought I would shake that off at some point. And he finally sat me down and said, what do you think you're going to do with your life? And so we went through one of those life discussions. And he gave me some great advice, coaxing, if you will. And so I graduated with an accounting degree from University of Central Florida, and that was out of Orlando. Back when UCF only had about probably 6,500 to 7,000 students. I think today it's eclipsing 75,000 or something. So ended up as an accountant in public accounting 2 years, and really fell in love with the human capital industry when I was recruited out of public accounting and placed at a company called Norrell Services, which was a large clerical and administrative temporary staffing firm based in Atlanta. Yeah. As an accountant there. And I really fell in love with the business side of what that whole industry was about, and later joined a company called Romac, a little $30 million company, and that you and I subsequently worked for. And it became Kforce, went public during that time frame. Yeah. I was the rookie of the year there, so I kind of really started on the ground floor from sales, was a top performer there, got a chance to run one of the larger temporary finance and accounting division, started the strategic accounts group for Kforce, met you in around the 99 timeframe, I believe, as you were starting a leadership development program. And I'm excited for us to talk about that too. And, subsequently into a series of senior leadership roles, culminating with the head of all sales and delivery for Kforce. After that, thought I was kind of retired and done. I think you and I left about the same time.
We did.
And after that, took a year off, and my wife said, you need to do something with your life. So me hanging around the house was not a good thing. Did some consulting and immediately got hired by one of my clients and helped them sell some of their businesses after we kind of grew them a little bit. Was done again, retired again, and moved to Georgia from Florida, and got a call from Heidrick & Struggles and to become the CEO of Lucas Group, which is a great firm, been around 52 years now. And we just sold that to Korn Ferry. And so now I'm retired for the third time, and I think this one is in fact it, other than doing some advisory work and helping people with whatever they need, and probably some board of directors work as we go forward.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that history. I did know that. And I did know you were a geology major. You told me that story once long ago. And so I love that. I've had a couple of those talks given to me, and I've given a few of them as well, you know.
Well, you can make those mistakes back in the 80s. Today that becomes a multi-$100,000
Oh,
mistake from an
yeah.
educational loan perspective, and
No,
you just can't do it.
no, there's no doubt about it. That's a whole different podcast. Kids graduating with six figures in student loans with a
So,
degree in sub-Saharan art and no jobs, and quite frankly, they're pissed off, because they get $800 a month payments for 30 years, no job, and their buddy that didn't go to college is working as a welder, making $90K a year. So it's a big problem in the industry. But anyway, we're not here to solve that one today.
we'll solve that next time.
Yeah, we will. So on the chance that someone's listening to this that's interested in talking to you, what kind of consulting are you interested in? Who should call you right now?
You know what? My focus right now is going to be around doing some board of directors work, whether it's with private equity firms or their operating companies. As I had a chance at Lucas Group, we were private equity owned, to get into that environment, or even public companies. As you and I served as leaders in public company. Probably more around that. And then I think on the advisory side, it would be really limited to focusing companies and leaders on exit strategies or strategic alternatives for their business, and really helping them get prepared for those events. It's amazing how many people develop a great company and a great brand, and they want to go to sell it, and they are missing key ingredients, such as number one thing every leader should do is they haven't replaced themselves. Yeah. And if you can't replace yourself. So, those are the things that I personally enjoy. And at this stage of my life, I get to focus on the things I enjoy as opposed to the things I have to do. So,
yeah, I love it. You and me both. I say I have the best job in the world. That's what I tell my clients. I love this so much, I would do it for free. And they're like, Mike, it's not free. I said, no, it's not free, but I love it so much I would do it, So, I hear you. It's good to be us at this point in our lives. And I'm happy to see you thriving as well. No surprise here. So let's get into a little bit about leadership. I always ask a couple questions right off the bat, Randy. One of them is if I didn't know you and we were in an elevator and I found out who you were, and I would ask, Randy, what's your philosophy on leadership? And you only had about a minute to tell me, what would you say? What's Randy Marmon's high-level executive summary philosophy of leadership?
Yeah, so I kind of came out with you have quotes, I have quotes, right? Everyone does, and I'm a quote junkie. But I will tell you that for me, I kind of sum it up this way. Leadership is about rallying a team to a common cause and creating an atmosphere where people always want to do their best for themselves and the team. Management's ensuring they do it. And I think too many times people conflate management with leadership, and certainly there are attributes that cross. But, for me, a great leader sets a very clear vision. They assess the current state of the business, and everybody knows what we're trying to achieve. They establish a game plan, and really clear the path for their people to succeed wildly. That to me is at the highest level, I think, how I view leadership.
Yeah, well said. I have to ask you the timeless question: leaders born or made?
Oh, I think they're made. I think, and I think it starts at an early age too. I think some people, and I don't know your view on this, would be a good discussion. I think it starts, for me, probably it started when I became a captain of a baseball team, way back when I was 10 years old. And what you understand, and what was infused to me at that point from a coach, was here's what I expect for you to be able to do, right? Be exemplary in everything and set the pace and the tone of what we're going to do. And I think it's absolutely made. I think it's a lifelong pursuit. I have never worked for someone that I did not learn from. I think, like you, we've probably learned what not to do from a few people. But even in those individuals, there's always great traits, and I'm always looking to learn something from someone. And I don't think it doesn't have to be somebody you worked for. It could be in a different company. It could be a coach, as you pursue, what you're currently doing. But it can also be your peers, and certainly those people that work for you in an organization. It's amazing when you open your mind up. I think great leaders take take in everything and really try to absorb and learn.
Yeah, great answer. I want to, and I don't let me put words in your mouth. What I say to this, my response to you is yes, I think I agree with everything you're saying. Like you said, I do believe there are some people born with an aptitude for leadership. They just seem to have it early on, much like music ability, math abilities, athletic ability, or whatever the case may be. So I do think some people are more inclined to it. That said, and this is leading into the next question I wanted to ask you, I do believe leadership is a learned skill. And that natural leader that is the 10-year-old captain of the baseball team, and he's just natural. The kids follow him. I maintain if he or she does not work hard to refine and maximize his leadership skills, someone without the natural aptitude that he or she possesses, if they're willing to put in the reps, can not only become a good leader and eclipse that natural guy, but I maintain that anybody willing to put in the reps and really study and practice in the leadership laboratory that we have, I think they can be a world-class leader. Not necessarily in a world-class organization. I think if you're in charge of the mailroom, the loading dock, the executive administration team, whatever, no matter what you're in charge of, I think you can be a world-class leader as far as habits, traits, characteristics, inspiration, things like that. Any thoughts?
Yeah, well stated. I think, certainly the learning piece is key. I agree with you 100%, though. There are people that, sports analogy, pick a sport, right? There are people who want the ball. They want the ball hit to them in the most critical moment. They want to shoot the three-pointer with, 0.5 seconds left. They want to be the person. And I think those are things that are not trained. That is where self-confidence comes along, and the building of self-confidence, I think, is a key aspect to great leaders. There's a great quote by a guy named Jack Gibb, and self-confidence is the result of a successfully survived risk. So it's kind of a learning component. And I think the learning piece, I think people that, to your point, they're attributes that people simply display and possess over their lives. I was very shy growing up. It's just at some point I became very good at baseball and some other things, and all of a sudden self-confidence and self-awareness comes there. And then you have others that are 10 years old, right, asking you questions about, well, how do you hold your hands on the bat? How do you do that? And so all of a sudden you find yourself elevated. And I think that's the big piece. And I think you have to be ready for it too, and you have to want it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm going to ask you the same question, but different tangents. You've been around a long time, Randy. You've worked with, observed, coached, mentored, trained, learned from, you name it. You've seen a lot of leaders at various levels for a lot of years now. And I'm going to ask you two slants of this question. The first one is, do you see any traits and habits that most of the very best leaders have in common? And then I'm going to follow it up naturally. How about, do you see any traits and habits that most of the, I'll just call them defective leaders, they don't have to be terrible, but they just don't have it. Some of them are terrible. Let's face it. We've seen some of that. So let's start with the cream of the crop first. Do they seem to have some traits, habits, characteristics in common?
Yeah, so it's a great question. And I think there's probably 5 or 6 things at least, maybe more. I'm sure more. I think great leaders, and this is whether you're quote unquote promoted into a new role, which always has its own dynamics in an organization. Now your peers report to you. But I think great leaders create a great vision. I think they are able to create a future destination of where the team is going to arrive. And that can be on a military battlefield, it could be wherever, in a corporate boardroom. I think they are great, and they take the time and investment to assess the current state of affairs that they are looking at. Once they've got that vision, where are we now, right? Current state. And they don't rely on other people's opinions, right? Because they really get invested, I think, in finding out. Third, establishing a game plan with timeframes for success. I think every plan has to have a demarcation. I think great leaders are able to articulate that. And that really gets into, I think, one of the bigger pieces, which is communication. Communication, and they're consistent with their communication, and they're transparent with their communication. And we'll get into why I think sometimes that's a very large failure. They lead with, and this is a phrase I got from you 24 years ago, unshakable confidence. Their ability to get others to believe in them, where they're going. There's another great quote, a leader is a person you would follow to a place you wouldn't go to by yourself. And I think that is where unshakable confidence. And lastly, they get results. I mean, they consistently get results. And I think when I look at great leaders, all of that really starts to embody why people want to follow someone.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Well, you mentioned communications as a trait that they all the good ones have. Let's face it. To be effective, you got to have it. But the very good ones, the great, if not the great ones, they have something special there. Would you like to go a little deeper on the communications aspect?
Yeah, it's and I can kind of use a little bit of being at Lucas Group and coming in, and I walked into a cyber event, new CEO, the company had been around 50 years. I was only the third CEO. And what you quickly figure out is people are always worried about who's this new person, right? And to me, you've got to communicate where you're going. You've got to communicate what you're doing. You have to communicate how well the firm/team is achieving its goals at every point in time. And I think when you do that, what happens is you get rid of all the noise. I mean, if you look at, not to get into a political scenario, and it doesn't matter who's in the White House or wherever. I think one of the great failures, and sometimes one of the great successes, the presidents that come out and communicate often so that the country knows where things are when it's necessary. I think they can build certainly a consensus. We saw that with Reagan. We saw it with Kennedy. We've seen it with a number of people. Yeah. I think those that use other mouthpieces to communicate their message create problems, because now it's, well, that person's just spinning something. And so to me, I think direct communication, as I said, when I got into Lucas Group, we had monthly, went out and had a chance to visit all the offices so I could get to meet everyone personally on their turf, not mine. And we established monthly town halls. And, the first town hall was scheduled for an hour. It went 3. We had communications. I had my executive team on there, and I answered questions for as long as people wanted to ask them. And I think that's a big part of the communication piece and being open. And I think when leaders are willing to do that, you get rid of all doubt. You create that unshakable confidence that is so critical for every leader to be successful.
Yeah, I love it. And I want to follow up a couple of things. I remember saying unshakable confidence. I still use that. And as far as a leader goes, they have to have unshakable confidence in your character, integrity, your work ethic, that, in your case, you had no agenda other than the Lucas Group agenda. Right. And I think that you were right in, and I know you, Randy, so you were an excellent communicator. You were right in knowing that there's an old saying that nature abhors a vacuum. And that vacuum, in your case, if you went in there and didn't speak, well, that vacuum will be filled by rumors, innuendos. I heard we're moving to Texas. There's going to be a mass layoff or whatever. So if anyone out there is listening to Randy, I agree with that. Communicate early, often. And then here's the thing the follow-up I'd like to get your thoughts on, Randy, is we were very good at this with K-Force. Yes. Our CEO, Dave Dunkel, we would collaborate. We would argue in the executive meeting. We would argue well. And then Dave would slap the table and say, okay, we're going with option B. At that point, when we left the executive board meeting, everybody was smiling, and option B it was. And so when Dave communicated things, he had a consistent message. But what we did well there was all of the members of the executive team turned into consistent evangelists. Correct. For Dave's message. And I want to hear your thoughts on this. I think it's not only important for you as the CEO of Lucas Group, you did great by talking. I'm sure that you enabled your executive team to say, well, look, you heard what Randy said, and he's absolutely right. And I can tell you, we're executing this. because the power of a CEO that speaks like you did is really powerful. The power of a CEO that has deputized his executives to be evangelists for that message is exponentially powerful. So I'll shut up and let you talk now.
No, I think that's well articulated. And I will tell you, certainly for those listening, of course they found out I was on, and so there's no one listening. But they didn't. But I will tell you, to your point, I mean, we had knockdown dragouts in certain meetings behind closed doors because everybody's passionate about getting to the destination. They just had different views on the best path to get there. And I will tell you, the ability for collaboration, I think, is critical. It doesn't mean everyone's right, but I think at certain levels you want people to have their input and be heard. And I think the opportunity, I was asked this many times, even at Lucas Group and throughout our careers. We've all been asked this. Every leader has. So I know this is what we're doing, Randy, but do you believe in it? They want to know, what do you really think? Or are you just a mouthpiece for something else? And it comes in a lot of forms. And I was asked that at Lucas Group, is this a board decision or your decision? And my answer was always both. I mean, that's why we're talking about it. That's why we're executing it. And to your point, the debates are for closed doors. And when you go out and you have groups of people who are confident and they never veer from it, great leaders do not blame others because they thought there was a different path and they want to go say, well, I would have done it differently. Great leaders don't do that. That's just not even a part of the vernacular. And so, yeah, I agree 100%. I mean, you got to be able to evangelize. And by the way, I mean, your people, and if you create the right environment, your people will feel great about, they can, that you're approachable, that you're in a scenario where they can absolutely disagree with you. And have a different conversation. But once the door's open and everybody marches out, if you create an environment where everybody believes in what you're doing and they never veer from it, it's amazing, to your point, exponentially how fast companies and how fast units and businesses can grow.
Yeah, I love it. My Marine Corps analogy on that, I always tell people, if you can get all of your people pointing their weapons in the right direction and shooting, you're probably going to hit the target pretty well, But when people have different agendas, those bullets stray. And next thing you know, the important stuff doesn't get hit. The important targets are missed. So I love it. Well, let's talk about the reverse of the coin. The ineffective, the marginal, the ineffective, even terrible leaders. Are you seeing have you seen any traits and habits that they have in common as well, that most of them share?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the first is inconsistent or no communication, right? I think that's they kind of sit behind closed doors and delegate everything. Then they're not out front. I think one of the things that you see happen is a lot of people, I used to have a mantra, which is communicate good news fast and bad news faster. I think poor leaders only want to hear good news, and their people are afraid to give them what really might be going on that where they potentially didn't, quote unquote, succeed at whatever that event or task was. And again, I think really poor leaders take credit for the good and blame everybody else on the bad or inconsistent. And I think a complete lack of transparency in many cases. If you want to, everyone doesn't need to know everything that a leader knows. But what they do need to know is, where do we stand against a mission, vision? Where do we stand as a team? Are we performing well? Are we cohesive? Are we achieving an objective? Or if we're not, where can we do better? And I think a lot of times, it's the old annual review, right? At the end of a year in a company, those should never be a surprise to anyone. On an individual basis. So, and I think sometimes they can be, and it's because of bad communication, inconsistent communication, and people don't want to face up to communicating bad news to their teams, their peers, whatever. And that to me is it's just a failure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Well, there's an old saying that I say every now and then. I don't know who said it. I heard this years ago. Well, I'm going to preface it with this. I think you agree, and you've already mentioned it, that you can actually learn a lot from poor, ineffective, or even terrible leaders. Now, you're learning what not to do, and what doesn't work well. And the adage I used to tell people is, look, you need to cast a wide net, because even a broken clock is right twice a day.
Right.
And so, sometimes your worst critic isn't really a critic. He or she's a hater, just a flat out hater. But in the barrage of criticism they're throwing at you, there may be a nugget or two where, she's right on that. We are not good at this, or I am not doing well at that. So it's like panning for gold, throwing the gravel out, and it's mostly gravel. But even among the haters or the bad leaders, there's a little sliver. Any thoughts?
Yeah, no, Lincoln had a great quote. It's attributed to Lincoln. And it was, I don't like that man. I must get to know him better. And it's, to me, that's a big piece of it. Because I'll tell you what, right? And when you get to our age and you've lived through a lot of leadership changes, challenges sometimes, when I can really go back retrospectively and evaluate it, there were a lot of great people who were poor leaders, and I might not have liked them because they were a poor leader, but when I reflect back, they weren't a bad person. Right. And so I think that the ability to, by the way, when you're in the middle of the fight, whatever that is, to separate those two is very difficult.
Yeah.
But yes, absolutely. I think you can learn something from every single person you come into contact with. And even the ones that are quote unquote great do things poorly. And so, you can look at both sides of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Well, I'd like to start, we need to discuss favorite topic of mine and yours too, the topic of trust. Yeah. And I'm so big on that. I actually trademarked the term trust-based leadership, made it the whole premise of my book. You got to trust people. Without trust, you really have nothing. As far as developing a leadership team, and a leadership team, as you know, develops a culture which executes strategy and tactics, not telling you anything you don't know. But I believe, and I want to hear your thoughts on this, that trust is absolutely essential to the effectiveness or lack thereof of a leader. And that you've got to get your people to trust you. And I'd ask your thoughts on trust, and what do you recommend to aspiring leaders that want to get better? How do you get your people to truly trust you, so that when you're talking, they really, and you say, no, it's a board decision and mine, that they really believe you, and that you do have no agenda other than the Lucas Group agenda, the K-Force agenda, the Acme Corporation agenda, whoever your employer is?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'll tell you, my philosophy on that, good, bad, or indifferent, was taught to me by my father, who was at Lockheed for 40 years and had a number of people under his responsibility. And, I think a lot of times we always hear the phrase, trust is earned. And I remember saying that one night at the dinner table, kind of coming back from college. And he said, well, kind of. And I'm like, well, what's well, kind of? He said, if you want to get to a destination quickly with a team, trust everybody. It's a two-way street. You can't ask for them to trust you if you don't trust them. Trust them until they prove that they're not trustworthy.
Yeah.
And if you start with trust, people will actually start to give it back, right? So how do you display it? I mean, you have a couple of things in your, I won't go quote your whole book, but there's a lot of things that I pull from it and I love it. And it's, your first one, trust-based leadership. The best leaders don't always have all the answers, but they always ask the best questions. And I think if you are willing to ask questions of people, that is the first form of starting to develop trust, because you're seeking an opinion or a thought related to something. And so I think that's number one. To me, I always trust people until they prove I shouldn't. And if they give me the same respect, we'll get to a destination pretty quickly that we're trying to achieve. I think second, and certainly, we hear about the military and where this probably shows up the most, but it happens in business. It happens on athletic venues and fields every day in teams. I think if you want to develop trust, the leader has to do the hard stuff first, and prove that you're part of the team, not just the person telling everybody else what to do. And then people start to say, wait a minute, this person knows what they're talking about. This person, I do want to learn from them. I want to be coached. I want to be mentored. Oh, and by the way, they make decisions. If they're wrong, they readily admit it quickly, and they move on to something that takes wherever the destination is kind of back in view. So, those to me are kind of a couple of the key critical elements to me, just related to trust.
Yeah. An offshoot of that, I know you've worked for leaders. We've worked for some of the same leaders, and they did trust us.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever had the misfortune of working for someone that did not trust you?
Well, that's a good question. I would say briefly, and it kind of manifested itself more from a standpoint, and I think this happens in corporate America every day and probably elsewhere, but you can end up having a peer or someone that's just been recently promoted, you're working for them, and they're not confident enough in themselves, so they don't want anybody on their team to get credit, right? And I think that manifests a whole lot of other things that comes out of that.
Yeah.
And I think that probably only happened to me once. And quite honestly, I will tell this to anyone listening that wants to hear it. You're potentially gonna find yourself in those situations in life. And I always look at it and I laugh, because at some point I won't be the last person to figure out what's going on. Somebody that they report to will as well. And those people generally don't have long tenures in single roles. So, they tend to work themselves out quickly, because if you're in a leadership role and your teams are not following you, they're not getting results, there's a lot of noise and chatter, it becomes very evident that people need help. And by the way, they may not be a bad person. They don't possess all the skills. And to your point earlier, They need to be developed.
Yeah, well, that's a key thing, what you just said right there. As you know, Randy, I'm in the leadership business. And, from the moment you met me, I was hired at K-Force, hired in to start a leadership development program. So that's all I had going for me at that point. At one point they said, Mike, we'd like to have you take over accounts payable. I'm like, great. Can you tell me what accounts payable is? You saw me. You saw the Mike Etor walk in that was long on leadership, short on business. I didn't even know what a publicly traded company was when I joined K-Force. I was a baby. I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew leadership. And I want to talk a little bit more about trust. I agree with your dad. What he was telling you, what I would have said was, I would have, again, paraphrased the great President Ronald Reagan. He used to say, remember when the Soviets, we were going to dismantle our arsenal and all of that nuclears. And Reagan said, we will trust, but verify. So bear with me. When I go in, and what I teach leaders to do is, look, you have to have a zero tolerance mentality for defective character and integrity. And I tell people, I'll forgive anything, but I will never forgive intentional breaches or breaches, therefore, of character and integrity. If you do that, you're probably on your way out that day, once we know that you've done it. Other than that, I need to trust you, and explain to him and all of that. And I do trust you, but I'm going to supervise. Now, That said, I tell people, Randy, and I want to get your thoughts on this. I think what your dad was saying is, assume that people are trustworthy.
Correct.
As a leader, you have to monitor, observe, evaluate, and supervise. And eventually some people will surface, not so much that they're not trustworthy, but that they need more supervision than others. Has nothing to do with trust. They need help. So I'd like to get your thoughts on that, because you're talking on this podcast right now, and some leaders have grown up or are in an environment where there's not too much trust from their leader to them, or they have trusted in the past and been burned badly. And my premise is, you show me a leader that doesn't trust, and at some point he or she did, and boy, they got that hatchet right in between their shoulder blades. Any thoughts?
No, 100%. It's I like how you summed it up. I gave you kind of the short version. My dad tended to be that way. Trust until you can't. And it is. There has to, the assumption, I think, is a good word, right? And I just, it's interesting. And we saw this at Kforce. I think one of the most, in every company I've worked with that I thought was a great company and a great leadership team had a couple of characteristics. But I think one of the big ones is we lifted each other up every day. You might not have known anything about accounts payable. I was an ex-accountant in a different role in sales. We sat, 4 offices apart, but we had meaningful discussions and we're not afraid to be vulnerable from the perspective of admitting what we don't know and seeking out help. And that is learning, just as anything else is. So, I think the trust piece, you said something too, Mike, and somebody asked me about hiring philosophy because we've all been in this business for a long time and I've hired thousands, you have. At the end of the day, if I don't think a person possesses integrity, I won't work with them. Mm-hmm. They can't work for me. I won't work for them. And I won't work with them at some point. And I think a lot of that kind of comes out in the wash. And I think, you hire first for integrity. I think if you're a leader, I think that should be your number one goal. Skills can be developed. Now, people need certain skills for certain jobs, right? If you're going to be a welder, you need to know how to weld, no matter how much integrity you have, or you're going to kill somebody. But, to me, it starts with integrity. It certainly develops into then trust. And I think if you have people with integrity, trust becomes easy to a degree. Now, that does not mean agreement, again, because sometimes, I dealt with a lot. We changed, like I said, we went through at Lucas Group, cyber attack 6 days before I got there. People are like, hey, I can't get access to my data. I'm like, what are you talking about? so you walk into that again, third CEO and in 50 years of the company, great people. And I hadn't quote unquote earned the trust, but there were a number of key people that quickly understood, and that's why the communication piece is so critical. Okay, wait, this person is not running away from a cyber problem that we just got hit with. The person's not running away from COVID and the ramifications, refinancing debt during that whole time period. And so by the time we kind of got down cycle, people saw the consistency. They see the ability of again, the integrity piece, right? And trust me, a lot of people didn't agree with a lot of things. But at the end of the day, what they all realize is, there's no underlying realm or desire for me. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about anything. It was about learning for me. And it was the biggest reason I took the role. And I think, trust is, if you don't have it, you can't go anywhere. You just cannot go anywhere. A team cannot function.
Yeah, I agree with that. Any recommendations? And I've been in this position. I have worked for people that hadn't trusted me, both in the Marine Corps and at Kforce. And I believe in every instance I was able to, and I say this in the best sense, Randy, finesse them to where they eventually realized I can trust this guy. I really can trust him. He's got pure intentions. He's on my agenda. He's executing. There's no hidden agendas with this guy. I can trust him. If you're talking to the leader, and you are right now, that wishes his or her leader would trust them more, how do you go about when you're in the position that you're not trusted? And it's not that your leader's being bad to you. It's just, man, the level of supervision is such that it implies almost a complete lack of trust. Did you shut the lights off? Yes, I did. Well, I'm going to go in your office and check. That kind of stuff. Right. Just a ridiculous amount of or lack of trust. What are some ways you think that the person can slowly but surely win the boss over and enjoy the trust that they truly deserve?
It's a great question. And it's funny because a leader you're familiar with, and I am as well, being at Kforce, not to make this a Kforce event, but there's a gentleman there who came in as CFO and later became president and subsequently retired, Bill Sanders. And, Bill had a very direct communication style. Some people didn't like it. I loved it, because there was it was always white or black. And I like that personally, right? I responded to that. And by the way, that doesn't mean like every conversation was a great conversation, as you well can attest. But I'll tell you what I learned, and it gets to your question, right? Because I didn't know in all circumstances, especially initially, right? How much trust do I have? So I started asking him. And I would say, and I think everybody that works for someone else in any organization, and it could be military, it could be corporate America, wherever, I think you should always ask. Don't ask for somebody to point out your shortcomings. Ask them what your shortcomings are. Ask, my goal is, and I used to do this every year ago, my goal is to become one of the top 5 named officers in the company. What do I need to do to get there? And then it would be, we'd go through a series of paths on, well, you're going to need to do this, develop these skills. And so then I would put it back on him. Great. When do we start? And I think that's a big piece of it. I think you have to seek out where the person you're working with or for. And I don't think all great leaders communicate that effectively. All managers don't. And I think you have to be in a scenario where you go seek out the answers to your questions. And you can't be afraid to ask them. And a lot of people are. They don't want to hear, whoa, okay. And it was such a great environment. Truly loved K-Force because we did our review process quarterly, annually, and it was very deliberate. It was a block time frame that was never changed or interrupted. And you got to rank yourself on a whole series of things. Your manager ranked you, and you didn't discuss what you agreed on. You discussed what you didn't agree on.
Yeah.
And that to me is a very healthy process. And I think all people should seek out where they think they should have developmental opportunities and where somebody can actually contribute. Because I look at your scenario as well in your coaching business. And if the person I need to learn from is not someone currently in my company, and we can talk about that as well, then you have to go seek that out as well. It's not always just about the person you work for or around every day.
Yeah, I agree. There's a law that I cite, and Bill Joy was the CEO of Sun Microsystems, and it's called Joy's Law. And Joy's Law, this is pretty much a direct quote. He said, you have to realize that most of the smartest people work somewhere else. And what he was saying is we got a lot of smart people in Sun Microsystems, but there's a ton of smarter people outside. We need to get consultants in. We need to cast a wide net and and bring. And I know you agree with that. Relative to Bill Sanders, I can throw an anecdote. Yeah, Bill was our boss. I think I reported to Bill for well over 10 years, and he was a man of few words. Bill would never be accused of cramming a 10-second conversation into 3 minutes. He was very direct. And much like you, I preferred that. Like, just get to it. And he would say sometimes, hey, great job, Mike. That's it. And other times he'd say, well, Mike, that didn't work out well. Tell me what you're going to do, so that doesn't happen next time. Nope, I appreciate that. He didn't beat you up for it or anything like that. But one thing that I want to throw out as an example, you didn't know this happened, and I don't mind it. I didn't mind it when you were there when I took over as the CIO. So I'm the chief information. I'm a non-techie in charge of 175 person technical department. And as well as I do how bad they had been. They weren't doing much right internally from a technical standpoint. Our emails didn't work. So, it wasn't good. And so they put me in charge out of desperation because they realized it needed leadership. I added no technical skills. I couldn't do it. So here I am. Now I'm reporting to Bill. This is when I reported to Bill. And he's thinking, okay, I've seen Mike. Mike's good. We have faith in Mike. But Mike, he's the CIO now, technical. And we have a glaring weakness here in our internal technology department. So the first 3 meetings that I had with him, first 3 one-on-ones, Bill was very directive. Mike, you need to do this, and I need you to do that. You need to go down there and say this and do this. And I realized pretty quickly through no fault of his own, Randy, he was not aware of what I was capable of as a leader. And that while I had no technical skills, I had extensive leadership and organizational skills. So I knew the right questions to ask to get my arms around it with my leaders, my department heads. And after 3 meetings of being told what to do and this and that, I was ready for bear the 4th meeting. And I had a roadmap, Randy, no kidding. It was 3 legal documents taped end to end. And, we were pretty good at graphics, and it was maps and pipelines and timelines and arrows and stars and phase lines. And he started, I said, Bill, if I may, here's your copy. I'd like to show you my timeline for the next 6 months. And he was taken a little bit back, and he said, sure. And Randy, I walked him through that. Bill, I plan on doing this. I'm going to ask this question. We need to do this. Bring in a consultant. I just walked him through the timeline. And I must have talked for a half hour nonstop, walking him through. And if you see the red star, Bill, that's where we'll go live with the project. And then this blue phase line and all that. And he was looking left to right. And this was a sentinel event in our relationship. When I was done, swear to God, Randy, I talked for 35 minutes, and he's just sitting there, didn't say a word. He's nodding his head. He's going left to right with me. And he goes like this. He takes the paper, folds it up, and says, sounds good, Mike. Let me know if you need anything. And from that point forward, for at least another 10 years, I can count on one hand the number of times Bill Sanders ever had to direct me to do something. He had faith in me. He knew I was on top of it. He knew I was collaborating and drawing from your strength and Joe's and everybody else's and my department heads. And he knew that I knew when to stop and say, Bill, I need your guidance on this, or I need your approval, or I need some cash, or whatever the case may be. So I want to hear your thoughts on that, because it's so Bill Sanders. But my point is, to the people out there listening, consider doing it. Consider going to your boss, scheduling a meeting, and say, Bill, or Joe, or Fred, Susie, whoever, I'd like your thoughts on this. I have a 6-month plan of attack here and make my department better. He or she may have never seen a 6-month plan before, but the only way I could get Bill Sanders to understand that I was capable of that kind of rational, systemic thought and organizational and planning was to do it. And he was gracious enough to shut up for 30 minutes. And that's when he realized, I don't have to give this guy this kind of detailed guidance. So any thoughts?
Yeah, no, well, there's a lot there. Well, I think it is a key. I think it does start with acknowledging what you may or may not know. And it is going to those individuals in the organization that will influence your career and your ability just to do anything on any given day. I mean, I had, similar scenarios with Dave, Bill, Joe. I think we each gained each other's confidence over periods of time. Yeah, I never will forget when Bill walked in my office and said, "Here's your new title." In 2009, I was like, "Well, what do we think this entails? We've never had the role in the firm." And he said, "We need to redesign the way the firm recruits talent, and we need to redesign the way we sell. We need to redesign." And I said, and then he left. He said, "Go do it." And there's no roadmap, no nothing. But yeah. he had confidence that if I needed help, I would ask.
Yeah.
He knew that, to your point, I would engage all the other people that were part of the firm that would make this successful.
Yes.
And I think most importantly, it's all about people, right? And that we would move the right people into the right roles throughout the organization to really help them individually flourish, as well as that then takes the whole firm to a different level. And but I'll tell you this, if you don't ask, and I remember this, Mike, I remember on 5 separate scenarios sitting in front of Bill Sanders, he said, "I want you to do this." The first one was take over as president of the Midwest. And I was like, okay, question, Bill, is this a step on my way to getting into becoming one of the 5 named executives of the firm? Yes. Then I remember one that he had, and it felt lateral. And he goes, "I know you don't see it, but I do. The dots are connected. Don't ask the question. This gets you to where you want to go." And right. And so that's a piece of it. But he knew I was going to ask. And I think you have to be open to asking a lot of questions of great leaders. And And you just have to be willing to understand what their view of your potential shortcomings are so they can be worked on. And I think it's where great leaders, they flourish quickly when they get through those environments. I think others can struggle because they either recognize maybe there's a deficiency but they don't know how to fix it, and they're not willing to go ask, right? Yeah. And that's where I think the coaching and the mentoring within organizations and bringing experts like yourself in from the outside, it's the different perspectives that get you there. And that to me is it's a critical piece. But you know what? I mean, it kind of goes back to trust is, and self-confidence is surviving, successfully surviving a risk that you took at some point and proving yourself. And that's just a big piece. And there are a lot of people who are not willing to put themselves out there, right? They want to be, there's an old phrase, I want to be first to be second, right? I don't want to be the first person, but by gosh, I'll be right behind the first person. Well, you'll always be second.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. Yes. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit. You're touching on the importance of role models and mentoring and things like that. There was a video clip out there on YouTube. I don't know if you've ever seen it, where the guy from Apple, Steve Jobs, he was talking about this, and he said, every now and then someone reaches out to me and I'll always help them. And he said, my experience coming up through the ranks was every time I asked somebody for advice or a little bit of mentorship, they always said yes. But most people simply won't ask. And if you don't ask, it's not coming. Now I'm paraphrasing. That was the gist of his message. And I'm not no Steve Jobs, but I agree with that. I want to, put the young Randy Marmon's hat back on, the 20 to 30-year-old fast mover already. People knew you were going places and you had the right kind of skills and the right kind of ambition. What would you have done differently, Randy? And I don't know, this isn't a loaded question. I don't know if you sought out role models, mentors, and coaches early on to the extent that you realized they were that important later on. So we're talking to the 20 and 30-year-olds now. I think a lot of times they look at what I do as, well, I'll get someone like Mike when I'm an executive. When I'm 40 or 50 years old, that's when I'll go to Mike. And I'm like, no. If you'll talk to someone like me in your 20s and 30s, the chances of you being an executive in your 40s and 50s are greatly increased. So I've said a lot. I'll shut up and let you talk. Role models, mentors, coaching, the necessity for you as a leader to reach out and grab things that can make you better.
Yeah, I think it's funny. It could be at a family reunion. It could be at a ball game. It could be anywhere. I think asking people what they do, how they do it, and how they've succeeded is just a key area. I live out here in kind of middle of Georgia, Lake Oconee, and, we're 70 miles from Augusta, 70 miles from Atlanta. And it's fascinating to me after getting here at this age in this life that I've lived. There are 1,000 ways to be successful in different careers. I have met so many people from such diverse backgrounds.
Yeah.
And even today, but I mean, if I go back and I'll get to your question, the 30-year-old Randy, I think the first thing is ask for responsibility that you're not comfortable in handling. At some point, if it's not going to be given to you, and in many cases, I think it is, it certainly was in my career, but you have to get outside this threshold of what you think you can do. Because until you get to a point where you have to take on something totally new, and I'm sure this, you were faced with it literally in the heat of battle in the military, until you survive that risk, that willingness to go do something, you don't know how good you are. You just do not know. And it can be small things, but I will tell you, that's number one for me. Number two, trust your instincts. Looking back on the 30-year-old Rand, trust your instincts. They're good. And as long as people believe in that, you're going to surround yourself with great people. And I think third is your ego is only important to you. It's not important to anybody else. And I think, that was a lesson learned for me a long time ago. And you've got to be humble and you've got to reach out to people and really seek information and knowledge. And I just think that's the biggest piece. And if you talk to enough people, you're going to learn a lot of things.
Yeah, I agree with that. Cast a wide net. Well, you've mentioned it a couple of times, Randy, about, you had the desire, the ambition to become one of K-Force's named officers. And for those listening that aren't aware of this, in a publicly traded company, the top 5 most highly compensated executives who are in non-sales roles or not on commission plans, those people are referred to as named executive officers, and they usually have a C in front of their title. Randy was one. I was one. We were named officers together at K-Force's team. Randy obviously desired to be one of those early on. He knew about that. I didn't know what they were when I first joined K-Force, but I wanted to go far too. I wanted to do well. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with wanting to excel. So, Randy, you're talking now again to the 20 and 30 and 40-year-old Randy Marmon, someone that says, I love leadership. I love it. I'm an accountant, but I love it even more than finance and accounting. I can see myself being not only the CFO, but the COO, the president someday. I think I can lead at scale, and I want to reach the uppermost echelons of this leadership team. Knowing what you know now, having achieved that goal, and I'm sure running into a few punches in the nose, so to speak, along the way, what advice would you have for the young guy or gal that says, I would like to rise to the highest level of this company or a similar company one day? What advice would you give them?
Yeah, it's a great question, Mike. It's funny. I mean, I'll tell a brief personal snippet here, not to get deep into personal life. My wife and I were not able, Carol, to have children. And, you go through that fun period of life. And we kind of hit a couple of realizations. Well, it's going to open up other doors for us. And here's an interesting door it opened up. I never said no to an opportunity. I mean, and so, the looking back part, if someone offers you an opportunity to do something and you do not see the immediate value, do it. Just do it. You will either learn and flourish and be successful and love it, or you will decide this is not for me. And that will keep you going back to the right path, I think, from a career standpoint.
Yeah.
And that oddly, to tie it into we were unencumbered because we didn't have children. I moved, I was able to move. I was able to be flexible. And I will tell you, I think in this day and age where COVID has hit, people are working remotely far more. I think for people that really want to distinguish themselves today, and this won't be popular, by the way, I'm a big, massive believer in remote work. I think people generally are more productive depending on the roles. But I will say this, I think people that are not visible in their organization, and that does mean occasionally going into an office, are probably going to be passed by those people who are.
Yeah.
Because I do think visibility does also lend itself to this discussion related to developing trust. It doesn't mean that people are thought less of because they work remote exclusively, but I will just tell you, I think people are going to lend themselves far more. The best conversations I ever had in life, and this would be the other part, is, going to the water cooler every hour is not a bad idea because that's where the best conversations happen.
Yeah.
And you really get to meet people with varied backgrounds. You get to understand, I got to understand what challenges and risks you were dealing with on a consistent basis. So I think that's really the biggest for me. You got to step outside your comfort zone. And it's just a common theme and say yes. I mean, if you can't clearly understand where the path is, ask the person that's giving you that new opportunity or exit ramp to jump off on. How does this help me later?
Yeah, I agree with that. I want to throw something at you. Our time is winding down, Randy, but we've referred to our time at K-Force, and it's obvious to the listeners that we both have fond memories of our time at K-Force. And as you know, when I joined K-Force, it was right before the dot-com crash, and charitably put, K-Force was having difficulties. I joined an $800 million company that within months became a $350 million a year company. And, you were there. Our stock was at $1.50. It certainly wasn't fun times, but we bonded together. banded together, bonded for sure, and with a lot of help from a lot of people, we pulled it out, went over the $1 billion mark and all that. And that was a very close-knit executive team. Mm-hmm. And it's a trite saying, you got to know your colleagues and be good colleagues and all of that. I will say this. I went through my whole time at Kforce never, ever fearing that somebody was talking behind my back or subverting me. I never had that fear of you or anyone else on the executive. I never, because we all knew that. Now, we could argue. We argued well as an executive team. You and I didn't always see eye to eye on certain priorities. But when the decision was made, if it was my priority, you supported it, and vice versa. And I wanted to show an anecdote that shows just how well we knew each other, Randy. I wore this Rolex watch every day since 1982. You know the story of this Rolex watch. At one point, late in my time at Kforce, and I want to say 2012, I actually bought a new watch, and it was a different kind of watch. And the first day I wore it was during an executive team meeting. And, we used to have lunch after the executive team meetings. And we were talking, we were having lunch, and I was eating a sandwich or something, and you were talking to me, and you stopped mid-sentence. You're like, that's a new watch. And I said, yes, it is. And I hadn't owned that watch for 24 hours, and you spotted it. It's a cute little story, but that's how well we knew each other. I don't know if you remember that or not.
I do remember it because I remember the story. I remember asking you, so Mike, you've got the black-faced Rolex, you've got a black band you wear, and you told me, you're like, yeah, well, when you're in combat, you got to have stuff that's not shiny. And I remember when you bought it the first time, and, I remember all of that. And those are great, and I do think that's critical, right? I think a lot of people, getting to know the people you work with is and their families and all that, I think, is a great element.
Yeah.
And it just develops a whole different level of trust. It doesn't mean you go out to dinner with them all the time,
right,
or all of that stuff. We were all working so much we didn't have time to go out to dinner together.
Exactly. We knew each other well. And I'm saying this for the benefit of listeners, not to brag about Kforce, though we certainly had a good deal going there, but to show what's possible. It is absolutely. We didn't go out to dinner with each other. We didn't do anything that was deemed artificial or anything. But I will tell you, and Bill Sanders was an executive that had exceptional external experience to Kforce. In fact, he was the only one that had significant experience at that level. And he said that our executive team was the tightest, most collaborative, most trusting that he'd ever been involved with, bar none. And he used to describe my relationship with me and Joe. Joe was a CFO at one point, and I was a chief services officer. And we did own together all the back office. And he said, you have to understand, Mike, the fact that you two get along so well, that's not common in a lot of companies. In a lot of companies, you'd be at odds with each other. And that's just foreign thinking to me, And so we did have a good thing going. So last chance to say anything about leaders out there, about the development of a cohesive, collaborative, collegial leadership team. Any thoughts, tips?
Yeah, there's a quote by Eisenhower. You don't lead people by hitting them over the head. That's assault, not leadership. And I think a critical element is and you've mentioned it a couple of times, and I agree. I think really great environments to be a part of, regardless at what level in an organization, people do not have to agree. What you have to have is the ability to communicate, understand, even if you don't agree with, the perspective somebody else is bringing to the table. I mean, I still remember when you came in and with the leadership development program, and I know you've been talking to GE at that point as well. Yeah. And there were people coming in, it's like, well, what's this going to do for us? What is this? I'm like, well, sit back and watch, and you're about to learn, because, the greatest, they don't know anything about staffing. Well, nobody went to college to be in staffing. Nobody, I mean, that wasn't a career choice. I think it is now. They actually have classes on it. But, your ability to come in and kind of change that. And I think that's the biggest piece. People have to be willing to get in, seek information. You want a collaborative team, you've got to really get to understand. I remember having those executive lunches and being able to sit across from you or next to you, and you would talk. I would ask you questions. We'd talk about stuff because I was not in the military, and you were able to share certain things, some of which were very tragic, that happened and that you witnessed, and you were a leader, around, and it just brings a whole different perspective of what a person has been through. And I think when you understand how a person got to their current destination, it gives you a far greater deal of respect and how you can collaborate going forward.
Yeah, I agree with that. And one final lesson that I'll throw out there, and you were involved, Randy. As you know, I joined K-Force in '99, and I hadn't met you yet. And the very next week, we had a big event in Orlando. Remember, we used to have those big. So we had a big event in Orlando, and you didn't know who I was. You knew I got hired, and I remember this. You invited me. You said, "Let's talk." I didn't know you from Adam, but Larry Stanzak, my boss, said you need to get to know this guy. He's an important guy. Here's a good guy, and that's what he said about you. And you invited me. So I came to your room at the hotel, and you had like a little bit of a suite, and you sit down, got me a soda or whatever. And we just started talking, and you asked me about my background and what did you get hired for? And what do you think? And from that moment on, I knew I had a friend and a supporter, and the ability, what you did was you made me welcomed. And not everybody was welcoming to me. They didn't see the value in what a Marine could bring. Obviously I didn't know staffing. I didn't know business. They just couldn't see the vision that you did. And I will tell you, from the guy walking in the door to have several people that were welcoming to me, and the people that I hired, as you know, we had to hire people, train them, and put them out in the field offices. You were an ardent supporter from day one. And I can't tell you how important that was to me. And the reason why I'm saying this is, of course, to thank you and recognize that's just the Randy that I came to know. It was nothing strange, nothing. It wasn't an aberration. I realized very quickly you were a good leader. But I'm saying this for leaders that are in a position to bring new folks in. That conversation where you just wanted to talk to me, what can I do to help you and all of that, that set the stage for me. I knew I had an ally in you, and I did. And so I'm encouraging other people to have the Randy Marmon conversation with people in their organizations. And, you were a relatively young guy at that point, Randy. You were in probably your mid-30s and all that, but you had learned to be welcoming to people that were colleagues and peers, even if you didn't quite understand who they were or what they were going to do. Any thoughts?
No, I remember that day too. I remember the day you got there, and we had not met, and it was for those listening, it were 2,300 people at the event.
Yeah,
I think that year, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
No, I think, and this kind of gets to the heart of what leadership is all about, and I think you have to support everyone around you. I think that's your job. And support means different things if they work for you or if you work for them or your peers. But it is about supporting those people around you, because here's the thing, right? No individual will be successful by themselves.
Yeah.
Or they won't be as successful as they could be by themselves. And I just, I've enjoyed our relationship over the years. Obviously, we've been disconnected for a little while, but it has been, I learned so much from you. I learned so much from all of the people I've had a chance to work with. I think when people get hit, great leaders, when you get hit by different events, you were hit with certainly several, and coming in and restructuring the IT department. I remember we got through with our crisis at Lucas Group that I walked into with the cyber attack, and immediately jumped in and kind of started allocating resources. People are like, how do you know what to do? I'm like, it's a process, and we're going to learn something about every 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And you just have to march through it.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, in hindsight, I would say I know what I walked into at K Force. Those challenges were challenges for sure, but they, in hindsight, they were opportunities for not only for me to learn, but to show other people what I was capable of as a leader, and how I could harness people with knowledge that I didn't have to get to a desired end state. And so, in hindsight, I'm sure the first or second week you were at Lucas Group, you were not having a good time, but it was an opportunity for you to show people who their new CEO really was. And so in some ways, I think they got to learn all about you, and it's all good. They got to learn all about you much faster than if you had come in and the company was on rails just doing great. Any thoughts?
Yeah, right. Again, it's the whole quote I had mentioned earlier about surviving certain risk, right, and coming through the other side. Yeah. I got a call Friday. I was starting on the 15th of August. I got a call 6 days before, 10:30 at night, from the then CIO at Lucas Group, and my wife's like, "Who is calling you at 10:30 at night?" And I'm looking and I see who it is. I'm like, "Well, I don't know, but it's not going to be good." And so, sometimes when you get thrown into those things, you use the right word. They're all opportunities.
Yeah.
I had told our board, I had laid out a plan on coming into the firm, and I'm like, I'm going to go visit all the offices in the first 7 to 8 weeks. I really want to sit down with everybody in their environment. I really want to understand what the culture is in each office. And that happened. And they're like, "So you're going to postpone the trip?" I'm like, "No, I'm not postponing the trip." I'm like, "What does that have to do with a cyber event?" I'm like, "We're just going to all be working, 10 hours during the day on airplanes and 10 hours at night until we get through this thing." But what it did allow me to do too is set an agenda pretty quickly, right? And in this case, the vision was to get on the other side of it. Here's the benefits, right? And this is to the opportunity piece. This was a desktop-driven organization. We immediately moved to laptops, right? Which you and I had for a while, and you took us through. We moved to laptops. Had that not happened, by March of the following year, we would not have been prepared to work from home. And you don't know where everything will take you, but the opportunities that present themselves as a crisis are great learning moments.
Yeah, I agree entirely. Well, listen, Randy, our time is up, but I can't let you out of here without asking you the fantasy question I ask of everybody. If you could bring back one leader from the past, he or she's no longer with us, and spend a day with that leader, who would you bring back and why?
Yeah, I have several, so I will narrow it to one. For me, it would be Abraham Lincoln. And the why part, I think, is, Lincoln is, when people study Lincoln, he had a lot of unsuccessful ventures through marriage, through some deaths, some illnesses, a number of things, but he kept plying on. And why I admire Lincoln, I've done a lot of reading and certainly watched a lot of documentaries as well. He had a vision of where he wanted to be. He had a vision of what he could do and what he could accomplish. And in the middle of all the strife that certainly the country was going through then, in a civil war about to break out, he sought to put himself in the middle of probably becoming the most hated man in America. And he didn't flinch and he didn't run away. He ran to the fire. And, I think from a singular standpoint, Lincoln to me is just encompasses so much in leadership, and he dealt with so much. And there's a lot, I won't get into it, but there's a lot of stuff I think people don't know about Lincoln, just related to kind of how he was doing things behind the scenes. Yes, he was a great emancipator, but there were a lot of things happening well before that happened.
Yeah. A little trivia. Did you know Lincoln was a wrestler?
I did.
Yeah.
A scrawny 6 foot.
I used to wrestle at county fairs and all of that, So he was the first president that was ever wrestled in the White House. But one of my boyhood and still role models and heroes, Teddy Roosevelt, was the only president that actually wrestled, boxed, and did jujitsu in the White House. So
not surprising.
A man's man, and those feats have yet to be replicated. I don't know if they ever will, So, so anyway, Randy, listen, I thank you so much for coming. If anybody wants to get a hold of you, how do they find you?
Yeah, LinkedIn is best.
Okay.
It's Marmon, Randy. And
right.
I'm certainly happy to engage with anyone and everyone if I can help.
Sounds good, Randy. Well, listen, again, I'm just thrilled that you came, shared your insights and all. This is going to be a popular episode. And again, I think you know how much respect I have for you. I can't thank you enough for all of your help and support during my near 15 years at Kforce. We were there, you were there my whole time. We did exit the firm. We both retired on the same day. Both thought we were done, and we weren't done. We went on to do bigger and better things, and I suspect that you may think you're retired right now, but you're not done either. So don't tell Carol I said that. All right?
Yeah, I gotta make sure she didn't come in the room.
You are not done. You are not done helping people. So
no, and I think that is also the lifelong part, right? It is our job to help everybody we can with whatever we can give them.
Absolutely. And what a perfect ending to this podcast. Randy, thank you so much. Come back soon.
Thanks, Mike. Take care.
We hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Please subscribe, rate, review, and recommend to your friends. Please visit our website at fidelisleadership.com and sign up for our leadership newsletter. Until next time, remember the words of the ancient Greek philosopher Pericles.
What you leave behind is not what is engraved in stone monuments, but is woven in the lives of others.